Thanks very much, Andrew. Good morning, everybody in UK time. Thank you for joining. The presentation that I'm about to do it's about the new national curriculum and life after levels. So someone at the Department of Education said to me the other day, well, there was life before levels, so there will be life after levels as well. And this is a reprise of it's a similar presentation to the one I did at the CODIS International Conference in London, held about a month ago. So I shall run this through with you now, and as Andrew said, any questions, we'll gather those together at the end and endeavour to answer them then. So let's just have a bit of a recap about what levels are. So they're the chief measurement in the existing national curriculum. As I'm sure you will all know, there's a new national curriculum that will start in September, so in a couple of months' time. And so the existing national curriculum, its main accounting assessment methodology is the level system. Each level has a sub-level, so 3A, 3B, 3C, for example, and each level describes the achievement that the pupils expected at that level. Level 1 would be the achievement expected of a 5-year-old, goes all the way up to a level 8, and that's deemed the most able pupils will reach that level at 14. There's a general expectation that pupils will move through one level every 2 years. And there's also an expectation that the majority of pupils will get level 4 by the end of year 6, which in the national curriculum is at the end of Key Stage 2. So that's where we currently are. However, we're coming to the last month or so, really, of the existing curriculum, and the new one starts in September. So last year, the Department for Education in London announced that when the new national curriculum comes on board in September 2014, levels would no longer be the main accountability part of the system. And this slide suggests some of the reasons why we certainly picked up from the department, why they feel that levels weren't a good system to pursue moving forwards. So the quote at the top there is an interesting one. The DfE believes that the system is complicated and difficult to understand. And there's an interesting piece coming up, especially for parents. So what's the DfE in the last, certainly 6 months to a year, have been far more focused on the importance of parents in education, in terms of giving parents the information that they might need, how the school's performing, how their pupil is performing, and so on. So the DfE takes the view that the problem with levels is that parents didn't really understand them, therefore they need to think about a new system. They took the view that the new national curriculum coming along in September provided the ideal opportunity to have a rethink. They also took the view that levels were beginning to dominate teachers' thinking too much. So the term level was being used and it was becoming too abstract and too broad. People were using the term level without really knowing what it meant and without really focusing in on, okay, well, if the pupil's working at level 3, what might that mean? And as I said at the end there, the key one was that parents don't understand them. So DfE made the announcement last year that levels would go. But interestingly, they didn't say and it will be replaced, or levels will be replaced with this, that, or the other. They said, we will not replace levels with anything. So the current system of national curriculum levels and level descriptions will be removed and not replaced, which was quite a big surprise to everybody because everyone assumed that the DfE would just introduce a brand new system. They went on to say, from September 2014, the new national curriculum will make no mention of levels. So that's an interesting piece there because you can see that that's freedom. So freedom for schools, freedom to some degree in the curriculum, freedom to measure pupils, you would think, in any way that the school might deem appropriate. However, the DfE also went on to say, teachers will continue to track progress and provide regular information to parents. How they do so will be for them to decide. We will not prescribe a single system for ongoing assessment and reporting. So again, there's that whole element of freedom there, putting the responsibility onto teachers, the responsibility onto teachers to assess the children, to provide regular information to parents, and also to provide freedom for teachers to use their own methodology to do that. And as they went on to say, schools will be free to design their approaches to assessment to support pupil attainment and progression. What's key about that last statement, as I put in bold there, it's all about attainment and progression. So schools are free to use what they want, but they still have to demonstrate attainment and progression. So in a funny sort of way, you might argue there that on the one hand, you've got freedom, but on the other hand, you don't. If you've still got to demonstrate pupil attainment and progression, you still have to have some sort of system that will allow you to demonstrate to inspectorate, parents, other key stakeholders, how the pupils are performing. So I'll just go back a step now, again a bit of the background. There are a couple of pieces that lie behind the decision the DfE made about levels, and some of those we were involved with. So I'm just going to cover a couple of these off now. It's interesting to get the background. So the primary assessment and accountability consultation, that took place last year. The consultation was last year, and that actually reported this year on the 27th of March. And what the Department for Education tends to do, if it's got a big initiative that it wants to implement, it will have a view about the kind of the bones of the initiative. It will put out to consultation to get views from interested parties as to what the flesh on the bone should be. So academics will normally report to the consultation. Ourselves, GL Assessment, we're often, we're all the time actually called in terms of giving oral evidence or written evidence and similar. So we provided some information to the DfE for their assessment and accountability consultation. The response that came out this year, there were three major pieces, I guess, that you could say are relevant to assessment and the curriculum. So the response included that there will be an announcement that there will be a new baseline check introduced at reception. So that's 4- and 5-year-olds. And that new baseline check will assess literacy and numeracy. So the check which all schools will need to do from September 2016, it will actually be optional from September 2015. The DfE is quite keen that a majority of schools might begin to take the baseline check from September next year, so that they can get some initial information before the test becomes mandatory from September 16. But that was an important, it's an important introduction in terms of a brand new test, for the simple reason that pupils before had never really been tested at 4 or 5 when they enter school. There's the early years foundation stage, which is more subjective and a kind of a teacher checklist, but this will be a new test that all pupils will need to sit and take. The second key thing that was announced in the consultation was a focus on whether pupils will be secondary ready at 11. The DfE is very keen, through the baseline check, to suggest where that pupil might be at the age of 4 or 5, and therefore how on target that pupil might be at 11 at the end of primary. So what they're keen is that schools will have a view as to what intervention strategies might need to be introduced for the child if there might be some weaknesses deemed at an early stage at 4 or 5. And the final piece said there were details of new floor standards, and that included a scaled score. So if you think about the fact that levels are disappearing, and there's always been the notion that the majority of pupils at the end of Key Stage 2 should be at level 4, so level 4 will clearly disappear. What would the target be instead? So the DfE is going to introduce a scaled score to replace levels. I'll talk about that a bit further later on in this presentation. But what we've heard is that the scale score of 100 would be the target for the majority of pupils at the end of Key Stage 2. As I say, I'll go into more depth on that a little later. So while that was going on, the NAHT, so the National Association of Head Teachers, which is the leading union, certainly in the UK, that represents the majority of teachers involved in primary schools, they set up a commission on primary assessment, partly to advise government. So at the same time as the primary accountability consultation going on, which was a DfE-led one, the NAHT was doing their own and reported to government. Again, we were involved in the NAHT Commission. We gave written and oral evidence about the future of assessments and the new primary curriculum and so forth. So when the NAHT Commission reported, these were its key points. It was about all those responsible for children's learning should undertake rigorous training in formative, diagnostic and summative assessment. So you can see there that the NAHT was still very much, despite the new freedom, the NAHT was still very into the importance of quite clear and rigid assessment regimes. They said the pupils should be assessed against objective and agreed criteria. That word objective is quite key. As I mentioned earlier with the baseline check, the DfE to some degree has been taking the view that the early years foundation stage, as it was a teacher-based checklist, may have been a little too subjective. So the NAHT said people should be assessed against objective and agreed criteria rather than ranked against each other. Schools need to be clear that any use of levels in relation to the new curriculum can only be a temporary arrangement. And we've heard a little more about that lately. So despite the DfE saying originally that levels would disappear in September this year with the new curriculum, and indeed they will. The DfE also realises that it's untenable to have just a cut-off point overnight, where all schools moving from levels to a new system that they deem to choose themselves. So what the DfE has actually said is that 2014-15 will be a transition year as schools look for opportunities to move from levels to new systems, different systems and so on. But there will be heavy encouragement, let's say, that schools should really start to reduce the amount of time that they spend reporting on levels. And the DfE from September 2015 is likely to take a very dim view of schools who still report on levels. So let's say that 14-15 will be a transition year on that front. And that last point there, it should be articulated clearly how inspectors will take account of assessment practice in making judgments and ensure both guidance and training for inspectors is consistent. Going back to what I said earlier, if you have this world of new freedom in the assessment system as levels are disappearing, it's also very important that inspectors are trained to identify that the assessment regimes that the schools are using in place of levels have worth and are valid, reliable and accurate. So there'll be more training there for school inspectors. That's about primary. I'll mention secondary very briefly, even though I know it's not necessarily relevant to the majority of the audience here, but at the same time as primary going on, there was also secondary, the secondary assessment and accountability consultation. And that second point there is an interesting one. The DfE is going to be asking schools on every school's website, there will be a snapshot of the performance that the school has made in terms of moving through the new assessment system, the national curriculum. And that, again, is all about parents. And as we said there, so parents can quickly understand the school's effectiveness. A consultation is going on right at this moment about what that should look like, how it should be presented, what that should contain, and so on. We'll be providing evidence to that consultation. The DfE is looking to do this so that parents, when they get onto the school's website, onto the homepage of the school's website, will see at a glance, this is the performance of the school. That third bullet point there, parents should receive regular information about their own child's progress. This will help parents hold schools to account for the teaching of their children and help them choose the right school for their child. Again, you can see in that statement, parents writ large. So it's all about giving information to parents. And as I put in bold in the bullet point, the penultimate one there, the DfE will be looking at progress measure being across a suite of 8 subjects. So they will be looking at performance across what they deem as being the core subject areas. And what they will use as their measure is a percentage of pupils achieving a grade C or better at GCSE in English and Maths. So as well as focusing on primary, you can see there that the department is focusing very much on secondary as well. So let's just go back then to the new system, which is a bit of a misnomer because there's not going to be a system as such. As I said earlier, schools will be free to do what they want, but there will be reasonably rigid guidelines. Some of the guidelines I put on this slide here, and these will be the sort of things that schools will need to adhere to, as well as the sort of things that inspectors and parents will be looking for the school to be implemented. So ongoing teacher-led assessment is crucial to effective teaching. So that's all about the teacher and the importance of the teacher in the assessment system. Schools should have the freedom to decide how they teach the curriculum and how to track pupils' progress. Summative teacher assessment and external testing are important, and that's the key line there. External testing is all about IGCSE, IB, GCSE, and so on. What might be classified as summative. But what this freedom also means is that schools are likely to be inspected more heavily about what we might call formative assessment. A formative assessment, you could argue, is the assessments that are taken on an ongoing basis in school, run by teachers, led by teachers, which will demonstrate pupil progress. Because there's a notion behind all of this, which is about you don't want to leave the pupil to get to the final exam before realizing that there might be an issue, or that that pupil can't realize or maximize their ability. You want to be looking earlier on to see where that pupil might need some intervention. You can do that best through formative testing. The accountability must be fair and transparent. Measures of both progress and attainment are important for understanding school performance. That goes back really to just what I've said. It's not only about the attainment factor, it's also about progress towards the attainment. And that last line, again, it's all about parents and key stakeholders. So a broad range of information about the school's performance should be available to parents and the wider public. So there will be more onus on schools, and schools will have more responsibility to making sure that parents are informed on a timely basis, accurately, but at the same time, parents are also told, well, this is where your child is, this is where your child could get to, and this is how we are getting your child to where he or she can get to. And again, that's all about that formative assessment. So let's just go to the reception baseline test. I mentioned it earlier. It's one of the major new pieces that the primary accountability consultation is going to introduce. So this is just quoting from the consultation. So a reception baseline will be used as a starting point from which to measure a school's progress. The DfE is taking the view that children as they come to school at the age of 4 or 5 will be taking a new baseline test within 6 weeks of that child arriving at school. The assessments will be used as predictors of attainment whilst reflecting the ages and abilities of reception children. And again, I mentioned it slightly earlier, the baseline test is in demonstrate that in the key areas of literacy and numeracy, that where the child might be as they enter school, and therefore where might be the key areas the school needs where the school needs to intervene in terms of that child making progress as they move through primary schooling. And there's some logistics behind this, the baseline test. So we're quite heavily involved in this. We're in the middle at the moment of producing a new baseline assessment that we'll have for next year. But there's a number of hoops to jump through. It won't be a brand new government test. So UK government is not producing this test. It's going to be looking to a range of suppliers that will meet certain criteria to develop baseline tests, and then schools will be free to choose from that list of tests. So criteria for the baseline test has been established, and teachers will be able to choose from a range of assessments which will be approved by the DfE. The criteria is interesting, it's reasonably onerous, it's all about the DfE will be expecting to see tests that will measure pupils in a certain way. Instruction has to be about some specific to do with the number of children in its development of the reliability of the data that comes out of the test. Degree, there's freedom there, but again, it's unlikely to be a free-for-all because the DfE will at the end of the day approve the tests that will be on the list. So the list of baseline assessments that schools can use. They've also said that from September 2016, the early years foundation stage profile will no longer be compulsory. So schools will use a profile at the moment. That's a test which is, as I said before, it's subjective. It's a sort of teacher checklist. It's observational to some degree, and that will become non-mandatory. So schools can still take it if they wish to take it. But at the end of the day, you can see that by becoming non-compulsory, the DfE is taking the view that the new baseline assessment will be the measure moving forwards. And again, parents in that final line there, also under consideration is how the results from the reception baseline will be communicated to parents and the inspection regime. So the DfE again is very clear about the fact that the results of the baseline must be reported to parents. If you're in the UK, it might be reported to Ofsted. If you're elsewhere, to whatever the appropriate inspection regime might be in your area. But that's all about reporting the results that the pupils get. So again, that's about arming parents with information within 6 weeks of their child going into mainstream schooling. So I talked a bit earlier about the primary consultation also introduced some new floor standards, so they're quite important, so I'll just go through those now as well. So the consultation stated that from 2016, a new floor standard will hold schools to account both on progress and achievement. So that's all about how well is the child doing, and that's also about has the child got to where the child could get to. The baseline assessment I've just been talking about, that the child will take at 4 or 5, will be used to assess pupils' progress from reception to age 11. So that will be seen as a kind of a national benchmark about where the child will be when he or she enters school, and then that's the launch pad for that child moving through school. An attainment standard will be devised based on primary schools equipping pupils for secondary school by the end of Key Stage 2. So that's being worked on at the moment by the department. What they said is that a primary school will be above the floor standard if pupils make sufficient progress in all of reading, writing and maths at Key Stage 2 from their starting point in the reception baseline, or 85% or more of pupils meet the new expected standard at the end of Key Stage 2. As I put at the bottom there, I mentioned earlier, scale score will be introduced that will measure that. 100 will be the standard, and we've heard from the DfE that in terms of their attempt to sort of link it to the current level system, because they've got to link it to something, even though levels are disappearing, they're taking the view, or from what we heard most recently, the view is that 100 will probably be tied to the current level 4B in the level system in the national curriculum. And the DfE is working on, they should be made available fairly shortly in draft form. I don't know how wide the DfE will make the drafts. They might only be for consultation purposes to a limited number of people. But they're working at the moment on performance descriptors, and the performance descriptors will basically say this is what progress looks like as a child moves through primary schooling. There'll be performance descriptors for Key Stage 2, the end of Key Stage 2, and the end of Key Stage 1. So it won't be every year, it will be at what you might deem the key transition points. But again, you can see there with the level system going, freedom coming into schools, performance descriptors, but on a reasonably irregular basis, there's a lot of freedom in there for schools to handle. So how's that gone down with schools? It's quite interesting. We obviously spend a lot of time with schools. We spend an awful lot of time developing our tests in conjunction with schools, trialing the material with schools to make sure that the tests are accurate, giving schools what they want, and so on. And so we work quite closely with our trade association, which is the British Educational Suppliers Association, and BESA does a lot of research every year about what are the key things that schools are going to be looking at over the next year, how are schools reacting to latest government initiatives, and so on. So I thought the figures here were quite interesting because it just gives a snapshot regarding how schools feel about the recent announcements about baseline testing and so on, levels disappearing. 38% are extremely concerned about the removal of levels in the short term. 32% extremely concerned about it in the long term. A third of primary and secondary schools planning to stop using levels before September 14. Now, this research was done towards the end of last year. So what's interesting there is this research probably has influenced government taking the view that, okay, but we won't just tell schools to cut it off in September because we know that's not going to happen. We'll give them this transition year of 14-15 to move from levels to the new system that they will implement. And you can see there that end of last year, beginning of this year, only a third of schools said they were planning to stop using levels before September 14. I don't think what schools had realised is that it wasn't really optional; they had to. But I think this has gone some way towards the government going a bit softer and taking the view that we'll give you a transition year before you completely move over. That third bullet point's important. It's highlighted again, the word parents. 33% of schools believe levels weren't fit for purpose for parents. Half said they were, but a third said they weren't. And again, that influenced the government in terms of the decision making it went through about should it replace levels with anything specific, or should it leave schools the freedom to engage with parents in their own way through their own assessment regimes. Now that last point on that slide is very important. When teachers are asked what type of guidance report they're seeking, the key requirement is national benchmarking. So again, going back to what I said earlier, schools will have freedom, but at the same time, that freedom might be limited to some degree because national benchmarking is going to be key. It's going to be great for schools to be able to say, okay, I can demonstrate how the pupils are moving through the system. This is the progress they're making. This is the attainment they're making. However, when schools are asked by parents or by inspection regimes or other key stakeholders, yes, but how are your pupils doing from a national perspective, that will be key moving forward in terms of the assessment regimes that are selected. They will need to demonstrate how the pupil is doing it on a national basis. And teachers also recognise that. So there was a long list in this research about the type of guidance and support you might look for teachers in your new assessment regimes. The national benchmarking came out on top. So that's a key area. And I've talked a lot about inspections. I thought I'd just introduce this slide from a COBIS perspective. As I say, I presented this at the COBIS, at the International COBIS presentation a few months ago, 4 weeks ago. And to be a COBIS member, schools must complete successful arrangements for school inspections. There's a number there, so there's a list there. And those inspection partners will be expected to be looking at some of the areas I've talked about already in this presentation. And so this slide suggests the views of some of those inspection regimes, going through some of the Ofsted reports from an international perspective. What I've done here is try to tie together, identify and tie together a number of themes. So there is variable quality on the reporting on pupils' progress. So it's not really standard yet. It must not be about inspectors spending most of their inspection trying to figure out how good the school's assessment system is. That's a key point. We've heard sitting in meetings with the department in the UK, in London, and with Ofsted, Ofsted meetings and other things. Something quite clear is coming out, and that's the fact that if you've got limited time to undertake a school inspection, but also you've got freedom, so the school has freedom in terms of its implementing its own assessment regime. The key thing there is what the inspectorate are getting a bit concerned about is, are they going to end up spending the majority of their time trying to work out the efficacy of the assessment system that's being used? And so what Ofsted's certainly saying is that they don't want to see their inspectors having to spend 2 days out of 3 days or 3 days out of 4 days or however long it might be trying to work out whether the school assessment system being used is actually accurate. So there's going to be an interesting piece there that for schools to get the inspectorate on board and the inspectors are in schools, I think a good tip for schools would be to be using assessment systems that are reliable and have a good evidential base and are seen as accurate, so that they can say to the inspectors, I'm using such and such a test. You can see here from the reports the data is accurate. You can see how I'm making progress. That's all fine. Let's now cover off the other bits of the inspection and focus on the other areas of the school. So in terms of the school assessment system, something which you can show is robust, reliable, valid, very quickly to the inspectorate will go down well. Inspectors will want to know that how you are measuring progress and what criteria you are using. So I've just mentioned that. It's going to be all about showing how pupils are making progress. The inspectorate have also said schools need to think about parents on this one. Parents need to understand. They want to know how their child is doing in relation to other children in the class, to other children in the school, and against broader expectations. So just going back to what I was saying earlier about schools themselves recognising in the BISA research the importance of national benchmarking, the inspectorate also see it as important. So it is about how the child is doing in school against other children, and of course that's what parents want to know. It'll be about how well the child is performing, him or herself, against the likely attainment that the child could make. It's also going to be about, well, how well is that child doing against the national system. Think very carefully about the sort of national tests you're going to buy into, which can benchmark progress and outcomes. And that last point, we expect every school to be able to show what their pupils know, understand, and can do through continuous assessment and summative tests. So that, again, is all about the ongoing progress, measuring pupils' progress against likely attainment, all about the thing I said right at the beginning, really, which is measuring where the child is now, seeing where the child could go, and then looking at the child as he or she moves through the system. This slide is all about views of the DfE. So I just extracted from the British Schools Overseas Standards for Schools document, which came out in February 2014. Some of the things that certainly the DfE have said regarding in this new era of life after levels, or the era that will come from September in terms of life after levels. So does the curriculum provide the opportunity for all pupils to learn and make progress? That word progress there again. Does the teaching enable pupils to acquire new knowledge and make progress according to their ability? Again, that's all about progress and attainment. Is there a framework in place to assess pupils' work regularly and thoroughly? And is information from such assessment utilised to plan teaching so the pupils can make progress? And that's all about progress again. And does the school provide parents, that word parents, with an annual written report of the progress and attainment of each registered child in the main subject areas taught? So you can see from those extracts that it's all about progress, it's all about attainment, and it's all about informing the parent about how well the child is doing. So again, in terms of life after levels and the assessment regimes that you'll be looking for, they will need to do those things. I put there some useful links. I believe we'll be sharing the slides with you all afterwards, so you'll be able to get into those. You'll be able to get into those links. But on there, there's links there for the national curriculum. There's links to the consultation of the government I talked about earlier, the NAHT, and so on. So that will give you more information. There's also a link there to our own web pages, which are about levels in the system and in the curriculum. So let's go on to the kind of assessments and what assessments out there might do, what you might want to look for in assessments in terms of life after levels. So this is all about finding a stable reference point through assessment regimes. And we would say that the most important question to ask is, will this assessment provide good quality information that can be acted upon to improve teaching and learning, or used to inform parents, governors, and the community of children's achievements and school effectiveness? So you can see here that it's all about the key stakeholders, and it's all about providing the information. So what would an assessment look like that you might deem as fit for purpose, so that might be able to meet that statement from that previous slide? So these are the sort of things that you'll need to be thinking about. So what information do you need? What information will the parents need? So you'll be looking for tests that can give you that information. How will this information be used? What type of assessment will give you this information? Which one is most sustainable in your own particular circumstances? You know, different types of assessments exist. You'll have some which monitor progress of pupils that are taken at the end of each year to measure attainment. You'll have other assessments that might be taken every term. Others might be taken on an even more regular basis. So it's all about how you want to use the assessments in terms of what you want to demonstrate. And this is what we would see as what good assessments will provide for a school. And it's all about evidence. And as I mentioned earlier, about parents, about the inspectorate, what they will be wanting to see is evidence that all the pupils in the school are making the required progress. So the evidential base is going to be key. And the stronger the evidential base, the more parents and the inspectorate can be kept happy that they know what's going on. So I've just put a list here. So we want to look at things that provide evidence of what skills, abilities, knowledge pupils have brought with them. That's the whole piece about baselining. Evidence to allow you to obtain an indication of potential performance at a later date. That will allow you to target set. Evidence to allow you to diagnose strengths and weaknesses. So that's all about individual diagnosis and planning. There's an increased emphasis, and there will be in the years to come, all about every pupil making the required progress. So that's all going to be about the individual. Evidence as to what pupils are achieving during the course of a year. So that's about monitoring progress. Evidence as to what pupils have achieved at the end of a set period. So that's about evaluating. What might be the differences between the baseline measures that the pupil took at a point in time and then the final outcome? So that's about the value-added analysis. And you can get all of that through accurate reporting, which is easy to understand. So accurate reporting, clear reporting, which looks at the data from the test and puts it into a form that is easy to understand, manageable, easy to communicate with parents and the inspectorate. That's going to be key, because that's the evidential base that schools will want to have at their disposal to suggest that, yes, don't worry, all my pupils are making the required progress. So you can do all that through different types of assessment, and there are two main types: criterion reference and non-reference. Criterion reference measures what a pupil can do against a specific set of objectives or skills. And norm-referenced, they're standardized assessments, and that's where a pupil's performances compare with that of their age-related peers. And information obtained from norm-reference assessment is useful for comparing the performance of pupils with the national average. So as I mentioned earlier, that's all about national benchmarking. We at GL Assessment, our assessments are standardized. We firmly believe that for tests to be accurate, to show schools really where they are, where their pupils are, to give good, clear information to parents and the inspectorate, and to allow the school to measure the pupil against the national average, that's key in terms of standardized assessments. So all of our assessments are standardized. So you'll be out there looking for tests to replace levels in terms of demonstrating pupil progress and attainment in this new world of life after levels. So what makes a good test? And these are the things that we certainly look at when we're developing new tests in our own test construction. So I thought this would be useful to share with you. So tests have got to be objective, independent of opinions and values of whoever conducts the testing. That's key. Standardized, I've mentioned that just earlier. The test administered to a representative sample of a defined population in order to calculate norms. And by using those norms as reference points, it's possible to compare pupil scores against the known standards of a performance of a specified group of people. So you can be saying that child A in my school in this classroom is performing relatively to child B in my school in this other classroom, or even child A in this classroom, or all my pupils in the school are performing against all the pupils in another school from a relative, in a relative way. And again, that's important in terms of the national benchmarking. The test has to be reliable, so you need to be looking at things, you need to be asking the questions to yourself, well, how dependable are the results? If I retest the pupil, will he or she get a similar score? Is the test valid? So that's all about what's the extent to which an assessment measures what it says it measures. Is the test discriminating? A good test should be. So it should allow the teacher to make fine judgments about different levels of performance. And I mentioned earlier the importance of diagnosis and individual pupil progress. Those fine judgments are key because that's all about personalising learning moving forwards. The test also obviously has to be easy to use. Just using examples from GL assessment, we spend a long time developing our tests. We spend a lot of money on developing our tests. One of the key things we do, there's an awful lot of thought that goes into it, an awful lot of trialing that goes into them and everything else. But what we do is we make them manageable. And also we make them manageable to suit the different situations. So for example, some of our tests like that you I'm sure you use, like the cognitive abilities test or progress in maths or progress in English, can be an hour long or 2 hours long or whatever. And you will need the test to be that long to be able to get accurate data out of them. A baseline test though, if you're looking at children that might be 4 or 5, they're not likely to be able to cope with the test. It's going to be probably longer than about 15 minutes. So part of the test construction is making the test manageable, not only for the teacher, but clearly also for the pupil, so that you are getting reliable results. Tests do have limitations though, of course. And so I thought I'd just mention, I put the slide in here because it's not a perfect world out there. So some of the limitations, it must be a good test with reliability and validity, otherwise the results won't be of much use. I mean, you can do all the testing of all the pupils all the time, but at the end of the day, if the test isn't reliable and valid, what are the test results actually saying? What are they actually telling the school, parents and the inspectorate? A test score is a snapshot in time. You're testing pupils at a certain point in a certain time, and the clarity of the snapshot depends on the quality of the film, the skill of the photographer, and the cooperation of the subject. There are external factors that can intervene, but one of the things that we always say, and we make when we're training schools in terms of using our tests, for example, one of the things that we're always very heavy about is remember that our test must be taken under test conditions, because that's all about the clarity of the snapshot. They have to be taken seriously. Looking at a test score in isolation will only reveal one piece of the jigsaw. Combining a test score with other information about a pupil is likely to reveal more of a whole picture. So that's all about testing the pupil, but also then monitoring his or her progress, or testing the pupil and then maybe looking at the strengths and weaknesses that the reporting from the test suggests about the pupil, and then going into the weaknesses and looking at the strengths. So it's not about taking the test and then saying, okay, that's fine, we've done all that, now let's just get on with the teaching. It's about, okay, well, what do the test results actually mean? And what do the test results actually mean for the teaching and learning journey for each individual pupil? And testing for testing's sake is a surefire way to end up with just lots of data seeking a purpose. If you don't do something with the data, then really what's the point of taking the test? So one of the things we always say is the fact that the test is really just a starting point. It's the data that comes out of the test which is key, and it's the interpretation and the analysis of data on an individual pupil basis which is of paramount importance. So I just want to go through our model of assessment. This is sort of the final presentation, really, because I've talked about life after levels. I've talked about the freedom for schools. I've talked about what makes a good test. You might want to be the characteristics you might want to be looking for. So I'll come on to what we do and how we do our test construction. So who are we? So we were originally founded by the National Foundation for Educational Research, and we're the UK's largest independent provider of tests and assessments to schools. We're nothing to do with government. We don't get involved in things at all like GCSEs, IGCSEs, the IB or anything like that. We don't run those sort of tests. We produce what we would call formative tests, progress tests, and tests of ability, and we're an independent provider. So our tests are always reliable. They're not polluted by government view or anything else. And our tests in the UK, certainly, we're in about 70% of schools. We use Ontario. Our literacy, numeracy, and ability tests have been used by schools for 30 years. So we've been going 30 years. The importance of that is it means that we've got a very, very good data trend and a good data pool. We update our data, obviously, on a regular basis. Our indicators of performance every year. We update our tests to new editions every 5-6 years or so. But because we go back a long way, it means that we know what we're doing, but it also means that we've got a big data pool to look at. Now, we produce our tests in paper and also digital, and we give schools the option. They can take one or the other, or if you're groups of schools or whatever, you can take both. And over 7 million tests have now been taken on our online assessment system, which we call TestWise. So TestWise is really the delivery platform. But all our leading tests are now available in a digital format. The tests are taken online. The people sit in front of a computer. They're delivered in real time. And I suppose that a key point here about the digital test, it's the same test as you would have in paper. So it means that schools can use a mix of different formats. The key thing, though, we say is that if you want the reports back almost instantly, you want to take the test digitally. Because taking a test on TestWise means at the end of the test, the reports are delivered within a few seconds. So schools that want to get a very instant view of the pupils and where they might go next and start to interpret the data very quickly, you can get those reports instantly from taking the digital tests. The paper tests, you'll tend to get the reports within a week or so. And we have moved towards creating reports that include more narrative and visual explanation. So I mentioned earlier the importance of data and the importance of the reporting and the importance of using tests which have reports which are reliable but also easy to understand. And what we've done over the last few years, I mean, many of you will already know our reports, and they're full of statistical data and everything, and graphs and charts and other things. One of the things we've done as well, schools increasingly have been saying to us, well, can you say a bit more about where that child might go next? Can you give me a bit more of a view as to, well, this is how well they performed in the test, but therefore, what might I do with that child next? So we've introduced more narrative into the reports, where we've gone some way to doing that. And what we're doing now is we're saying, so on the basis of the results that child has got from the test, here are the child's strengths, here are the child's weaknesses. You might want to think about doing this or the other with child. It can only be quite broad because you can only say so many things, and obviously they teach the child better than ourselves. But that's quite interesting in terms of giving the teacher a bit of a view as to what can happen next. That's also useful for the teacher to be discussing with the parent. So if the parent's interested about what the parent could do, if the parent's supporting from home, or how the parent might get involved as well, that narrative is important there. So in all of our tests, we've been introducing over the last few years new narrative sections which give a little more information. The key points in an assessment system that we always look to, and we would always suggest that schools should look at, and that is to track pupil progress against expectations. The test should diagnose areas of weakness, should support teacher planning, it should enable the teacher to report to parents accurately, and provide information for transition. So our test will allow the teacher to do all of those things. I'm just putting up this little visual here because this is what we call a 4D model, we call this. And this is kind of our philosophy about testing and how a good assessment regime should look like. And it's about the whole pupil view. So it's kind of a holistic approach to the pupil and to testing the pupil. And none of these circles is more important than the other. Each are as important as the other. You can see there, just starting on the left, teacher judgment. Teacher's key, because the teacher teaches the pupil, knows the pupil. The teacher will know the strengths and weaknesses of the pupil just from teaching that pupil. But as I said earlier, obviously that can be subjective, but also accurate. And so you want to look at other things as well that can also put that subjectivity into an objective framework. So you want to be looking at attainment. You want to be looking at attitudes, and you'll want to be looking at ability and potential. And going, as I said earlier, which is all about, if you don't know where the pupil is now, if you don't know where the pupil can get to, how do you know where that pupil can go, and then how can you monitor that pupil so you know that he or she is likely to reach their potential? You can see there that bottom circle, you might start with a test which looks at ability and potential, and then the top circle, that might then go on to use assessments which look at attainment. And then the piece about attitudes is key, because it's not necessarily the case that pupils will perform well or not so well simply because of their academic ability. It might be the case that there are other things that will influence that pupil. So that can be their attitude to learning, that could be their relationship with the staff, that there could even be issues about bullying or other things like that. That can influence the pupil. So what this 4D model shows is you want to be considering all these things when you're looking at an assessment system. And in terms of what we do at GL Assessment, we have tests for the ability and potential. An example is CAT, Cognitive Abilities Test. We have tests for attainment, which are progress in English and progress in maths and others. And we also have a survey called PASS, which is a pupil attitude to self and school. And that's the piece that deals with attitudes. If you look at the data that comes from all those tests and you put them together with the teacher judgment, then you can get that whole view of the pupil. I've talked about data. Data is key. So the different sorts of data, normative, summative, and formative data. I won't get into this in real depth, but it's all about the reports that come from assessments. Data is important, and the data can be classified in these three ways. And you'll want to look at the data in different ways in terms of interpreting that data as to where the pupil can go, whether they can go next, and how best you can take them there. And this is my last slide. This presentation is to give you information. I mentioned the 4D model just earlier. This is all about life after levels and the new national curriculum. So I thought I'd just end with a slide really, which is about progress in English and progress in maths. There are two leading tests in terms of attainment. So they measure what pupils understand, know, and can do at the end of each year. We're in the middle of updating them at the moment for the new national curriculum. As I say, the new curriculum starts September this year. We find that progress in English and progress in maths tends to be taken by schools towards the end of the academic year to measure progress made in that year. These tests will be available from April 2015 to allow schools that are coming to the end of their first year in the new national curriculum to measure the progress that pupils are making. And we've had a lot of interest in these tests, as you can imagine, because we know that a lot of schools are intending to use them as their solution to life after levels. If levels are disappearing from the curriculum, and parents and the inspectorate and teachers will want to know, okay, well, how do I measure the progress that my pupils are making now in this new curriculum? It's these kinds of tests which are interesting the teacher, because they can provide that solution to life after levels. They will allow teachers to see where what the pupil knows, where the pupil can go next, what the data means, and similar factors there. So I hope you found that of interest. That's quite a quick whiz through what's been going on over the last year in terms of the new curriculum. When you hear about levels disappearing, what that means, life after levels, I'm sure you've heard talk of the baseline assessment, so I've covered what that means. And I've also given you some information which I hope has been helpful regarding what you should be looking for in the assessments that you might use to demonstrate pupil progress in a life after levels from September.